My name is Brian McElwee and I'm a lecturer in philosophy at the University of Southampton. In this video, I'm going to talk about Rule Utilitarianism. Rule Utilitarianism is a normative ethical theory. It aims to answer the central question of ethics. How should we live? Or alternatively, how should we act? Rule Utilitarianism's answer to this question is that we should follow the code of rules that will lead to the most happiness. Now, here are two important points to bear in mind when thinking about Rule Utilitarianism. First, it's important to realise that Rule Utilitarianism aims to answer the same central question of ethics that Act Utilitarianism aims to answer. Act Utilitarianism's answer is that we should do whatever act leads to the most happiness. Rule Utilitarianism, by contrast, says that what we should do is follow a particular code of rules, namely that code of rules that will lead to the most happiness. Second, how can something abstract like a code of rules bring about happiness? Is that really the sort of thing that can bring about effects in the world, such as happiness? Well, what can have effects is people accepting or following a code of rules. So Rule Utilitarianism says that we should follow the code of rules that would bring about the most happiness if it were accepted or followed by people in general. So when I'm wondering whether I should do something, I can ask myself, would I be told to do this by the code of rules that would bring about more happiness, if generally followed, than by any alternative code of rules? Now, what makes Rule Utilitarianism attractive? Well, firstly, it combines two appealing ideas. The idea that what really matters is happiness, and the idea that ethics is about living by a set of rules that everyone should live by. Secondly, it promises to avoid some of the more pressing objections to Act Utilitarianism. Now, does Rule Utilitarianism face any objections? Well, here's one challenge to the Rule Utilitarian. Suppose there's a rule that usually brings about happiness when it's obeyed, but I know that in some particular case, it's definitely going to bring about more happiness if I break the rule. For example, it will usually lead to the most happiness if people obey the simple rule, don't steal. But imagine that in my present circumstances, it's clear that stealing something will in fact lead to more happiness. Perhaps stealing is the only way to feed a starving person. What should I do? Well, here the Rule Utilitarian faces a dilemma. If she says that we should stick to the rule, even though it will lead to less happiness, she can be accused of rule worship. She seems to care more about sticking to rules than she does about promoting happiness and preventing unhappiness. And that seems like a funny sort of thing for a utilitarian to say. On the other hand, she could say that we should break the simple rule against stealing in these circumstances. Perhaps the rule we should obey is instead a more complex rule. You shouldn't steal unless doing so will bring about more happiness. Now that sounds more like a utilitarian thing to say, but might it mean that Rule Utilitarians end up just saying the same thing as Act Utilitarians? If the Rule Utilitarian says that you should break a good simple rule whenever doing so will lead to the most happiness, it seems that what they really think you should do is just whatever will lead to the most happiness. Obey the simple rule when that leads to the most happiness, and break the simple rule when that leads to the most happiness. The concern here is that Rule Utilitarianism simply collapses into Act Utilitarianism. How do you think the Rule Utilitarian should respond to this dilemma?